Greetings, Earthlings. Another great Earth Tools video filmed by Josh Lyons.
Hey.
So we're going to talk today about a very simple procedure, or what seems a very simple procedure, but is a little more complex, and that is changing the PTO gear shift joint, this little plastic joint on a BCS tractor. This little plastic joint has been on BCS tractors on the PTO side since the late 1980s, the same joint. And, you know, they get broken for various reasons. The plastic doesn't hold up forever. The most common reason these break is because at this rod, this vertical rod, swivels in a socket at its base. Now this is the new style. This is actually a 749. No, sorry, this is a 739 tractor. But anyway, it has the new style swivel assembly at the base. We'll look at this 853 over here to the side. This is a brand new 853. This is the older style socket assembly. It's a cast socket assembly that this rod fits into. And this, when you turn the handlebars around, this whole lever swings around to match the handlebars being on the other side of this machine. As you can see, the PTO rod is supposed to swivel in this socket at its base. These old cast sockets had a way of holding moisture pretty badly, and they would rust up, and then people would try to swing around anyway, and they'd shear this joint off because the joint is what is, you know, connecting these two rods together here. They go snap, and that was the end of that. The new style socket assembly on the PowerSafe machines is a much better design because it is not cast, it is open, and the rod can just swivel within that. As you can see, there's a lot more clearance on there. Moisture is not going to get in there and lock that up. Why BCS hasn't introduced this socket assembly on the 853 and 852 tractors and basically the rest of the line, I have no idea, because these have been in production for 2 or 3 years now, and BCS refuses to use them on the non-PowerSafe tractors, which makes no sense because they're fully interchangeable and this is a much better system. However, all that said, we're going to pretend that this plastic joint is broken and has to be replaced. Now, the joint is secured onto this vertical rod by a roll pin. People look at that and they say, well, that's a little Allen head. No, the Italians love roll pins. So the roll pin is like a spring steel pin that's rolled up into a little roll and driven through the hole. So it's trying to spring outward and it's kind of jammed into the hole. So you have to just drive it out. You use a pin punch to drive it out of there. Now, the thing is, I put this pin punch against here. I hit this with a hammer like so. Here, you can back up a little there, Josh. And what's going to happen is this is going to bounce and bounce and bounce because this is unsupported all up here. It's just supported at the bottom. And if I hit this enough, it's going to bend or break this rod. There's no way that you can get this out of here with this thing just flopping around up here. So if you have to remove this with the rod still installed, you take a block of wood and stick it in here that will support that thing. And now you can actually drive it out, because it's not bouncing and you're not going to break the rod. It's still tough. Get in there. It's moving just slightly. Oops. I had loosened the cotter. I had taken this cotter pin out earlier and now it just popped out of there. Stick it back in there. Or I had bent it straight so I could remove it later. Anyway, you can see that I'm driving that pin slowly in there, and I'm going to drive it completely out if I keep this up. Now, I will demonstrate another way of taking this out, because this is not really the best way, because it's still got some bounce, because you can see the top of this rod is bent. So as I drive this, it's trying to rotate that rod, because I'm hitting off center. If this rod were perfectly straight all the way up, then this load would be centered. But every time I hit this, it's trying to swivel this rod around like this. And what's keeping it from swiveling is the fact that this rod is stuck through here and it's keeping it from going this way. So, for example, if this rod, if this pin were removed, and we'll go ahead and remove it. I shouldn't have bent it. Oh well. So if this were removed, or say the joint was already broken, which is probably the reason you're replacing the joint, if this was already broken, you couldn't do this procedure at all, because every time you hit this, it would just spin around like this. There's no way to support it. So the best way then to remove this is actually to remove the entire vertical rod. Now on the new style lever, which is this one, there is a 13mm nut at the bottom securing it in there. So you just remove that nut and pull the rod straight up off of there. Then you, you know, set this over like an opening in a socket. You support it with a little socket so you can drive the pin down into the hollow space in the socket, or a hole drilled in a piece of wood or something like that, so that this is laying down flat against something firm. Now on the style that you're more likely to be changing, which is the 853 style here, this one is a little more complicated to remove because it is secured by a roll pin right there. And people say, well, how can there be a roll pin driven through this and this thing still actually be able to swivel around? Well, it's because that roll pin, as you can see, is not directly in the center of this rod. It's actually slightly off to one side. And what you'll see when we remove this is there is a groove machined around the perimeter of this rod, halfway up this socket, and that pin goes through that groove. So it allows it to spin, but it keeps it in there. It retains it top to bottom. Anyway, to remove this, what we're going to do is drive this pin out of here. And you have a handy Josh around to catch the pin, keep it from flying into the space. And then pop this up out of here. And then we can lie this down, you know, take this, bend the cotter pin straight with the pliers, take it out, you know, lay this down on a, as I described with the other thing, if we drilled a hole in this piece of wood and then set this on top of it so we were driving down, actually it's better the other way because it's flat on that side, you'd set that down there and drive that pin out of there. Then when you get the new joint and you're putting it back together, it's actually, I should really have backed up, because what you want to do before you do any of this is you want to take a picture, if you've got an electronic device, which you probably do since you're watching this video. Yeah, thanks. Take a picture of how that joint was oriented, because this has a curvature to it, the top of the rod, as we've already talked about, and this joint is not 100% symmetrical. It's got this kind of raised plastic thing on the one side, and that has to be oriented exactly the way it was. If you get the joint on there backwards or upside down or both, it's not going to work properly. The positioning of this is critical because it had this rod has to come in from this side. That is, it comes in from this side. You know, cotter pin goes on this side. If you put the rod in from this side, you're not going to get the cotter pin here because this raised portion of the joint is in the way. And this whole thing is made so that, I'll demonstrate on this one, which is still assembled here. It's made so that the PTO lockout system of the tractor, which is this assembly here, this is your PTO lockout bumper, this is your PTO lockout lever. The PTO lockout is what keeps you from engaging the PTO when you're in reverse, when you have a soil working implement on the tractor. This keeps you from tilling your feet up. This is a very good thing because most people like their feet. There's a few people who don't, but we're not going to talk about them. So the thing is, when you turn the handlebars around to the mowing position, when you rotate this thing around, the PTO lockout bumper goes away because you no longer need the function of keeping it out of keeping the PTO from engaging when the tractor is in this direction, because this direction is now forward. It's not reverse anymore. So you need to go this way with the PTO engaged to run your mower or whatever it is. But when you turn the handlebars back around like this bumper comes into play. You try to put it in reverse and it won't go because this thing bumps against that and pushes the PTO out of gear like so, and you don't till your feet up. So the positioning of this helps with that because it orients the rod only one way on the lower rod, or it orients the upper rod one way on the lower rod and doesn't let you assemble it wrong. So that's critical that that all go together correctly. Also, if you ever break this rod and have to replace it, you want to make sure this gets oriented properly. If you put this on backwards or upside down or in the wrong hole, see there's two different holes here for different model tractors, the PTO lockout system won't work properly. So if you're replacing this rod, make sure you take a picture of the thing beforehand of the orientation of both the plastic joint and the PTO lockout knob so that you can get it back together correctly. That's it. I'm not going to go through the entire procedure of removing this because you can see how it's done. Thanks for watching.